Before we get any further, reread the title of this video again, because the way that it was worded and capitalized was very, very specific and intentional. Let me give you two different titles with the same words with one difference. Why Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is the worst Star Wars movie, or Why Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is the worst Star Wars movie. The difference is actually very, very crucial, as the two are two very different statements. If I were to make a video with the first title, I would be sitting here telling you why the 9th Star Wars film was the worst out of the bunch. I would be talking about weird directing choices, characterizations, plot, story, and maybe something somehow worse than Jar Jar Binks. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm not here to talk about why this film was crafted in any inferior way to any of the other Star Wars films. Like I've alluded to before, I do believe that this movie is technically and superficially enjoyable. As a film, and not as a Star Wars film, The Rise of Skywalker does not do anything egregiously wrong, in my opinion. Are there plot conveniences? Absolutely, but then again, every major film has plot conveniences. Endgame, for crying out loud, has plot conveniences. Anybody remember the rat that saved the universe? But the story for The Rise of Skywalker on its own, from beginning to end, makes sense, and has a clear 3-act structure. The characters are likable, the actors give great performances, the action is superb, the film has a clear conflict, and it resolves it satisfyingly at the end. Again, as a film, and not as a Star Wars film, The Rise of Skywalker doesn't do anything majorly wrong. So then, why do so many Star Wars fans hate this movie? Let me take you back to 1999 when Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace was released. Many Star Wars fans do not like this movie. Why is that? I think the reasons are pretty clear. Jar Jar Binks was a horrible addition to the franchise, the story was lackluster, the visual effects, though mostly great, were very CGI heavy in hindsight, and the performances were mostly wooden and stale. These are all problems that The Rise of Skywalker mostly does not suffer from. Like I've said a few times now, I maintain that The Rise of Skywalker is made and crafted well. The problem with The Phantom Menace has nothing to do with its place in Star Wars, but everything to do with the execution. Any critic can explain why that movie didn't work. Even critics who hadn't seen any Star Wars film. But not any critic can tell you why the fans are divided and so against The Rise of Skywalker. Let me take you to an alternate dimension, in which Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker exists as a standalone film. There is no Star Wars original trilogy, there are no prequels, there is only The Rise of Skywalker. Let's re-examine the film in this context. The movie opens with a dictator-like leader in Kylo Ren who is furiously looking for some kind of artifact. But there is a larger force at play, which turns out to be this shadowy figure known as Emperor Palpatine, who has been through some traumatic event that has left him deformed and attached to some kind of medical device. But it's clear that he's infinitely more powerful than Kylo Ren, and he tells him to hunt down this girl. So then we cut to the band of resistance fighters searching for ways to undermine this new regime known as the First Order or the Final Order or whatever they want to call it. We also have the aforementioned girl Rey, who is training as this mystical warrior known as a Jedi under the instruction of her master Leia, who is Kylo Ren's mother, and the sister of one of the most powerful Jedis in the galaxy, Luke Skywalker, who had passed away a year earlier. From there, the heroes band together to find this Sith Wayfinder to head to Exegol, the planet where the Emperor is hiding, while Kylo Ren tries to hunt them down. Action and incitement ensue, and Kylo Ren reveals to Rey that she is, in fact, a descendant of this evil Emperor Palpatine, which causes her to question her entire training. She finds the Wayfinder and is confronted again by Kylo Ren, but then he breaks the Wayfinder and she goes off into hiding thinking that she's failed. Meanwhile, Leia uses her final strength to turn Kylo Ren, formerly Ben Solo, and her son, back to the light side. He's met by a memory of his deceased father, Han Solo, a man who he killed in cold blood, but Han forgives him and gives him the strength to make the turn back to the light side. From there, Rey is met by the ghost of the Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, who gives her the strength to do what she has to do to head to Exegol and defeat the Emperor. So now the story comes to a head and everyone heads to Exegol and a huge final battle ensues, in which Rey and Ben Solo, now redeemed, team up to defeat the Emperor. At the end, Rey is about to die, but Ben heals her, a power foreshadowed earlier by Rey and a serpent, and the heroes win the day, with Rey throwing away her evil lineage to take up the noble mantle of Skywalker. See? That wasn't so bad. It works. As a standalone story, The Rise of Skywalker works. But that's not what I'm here to convince you of. Because as we all know, The Rise of Skywalker is not a standalone film. It is part of one of the most beloved franchises in the history of cinema, and for better or for worse, it is linked to all 8 other films preceding it, especially the previous 2. The Rise of Skywalker fails as a Star Wars film, again not because it was made poorly like the prequels, but because it ignored the parts of Star Wars that fans loved and instead tried to make as crowd-pleasing of a movie as possible. The trilogy lacked direction. There was no central vision. J.J. Abrams set something up, Rian Johnson deviated from it, and clearly J.J. Abrams got upset because he tried to right the ship again to what he thought was right. But at that point, it was too late for that. What Abrams should have done instead, for better or for worse, was to let go of his own ego and simply continue the storylines that Johnson had left him. Think about it. Emperor Palpatine being in this movie at all in the larger context of the sequel trilogy makes absolutely no sense, and it doesn't help that Abrams chooses to completely ignore the reason as to why. There is such little care and explanation given to the return of a villain who presumably blew up at the bottom of an elevator shaft. And the fact that Kylo Ren was redeemed at all is almost insulting. Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying that the mere idea of Kylo Ren being redeemed is a bad one. I'm saying that in the context of what was set up in The Last Jedi, it makes absolutely no sense. In The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson clearly sets up the idea that Kylo Ren has been dealing with the struggle between the light and the dark side as he couldn't kill his mother at the beginning of the film. But then later on, he finds his motive and he ends the film as the Supreme Leader, having killed his master Snoke. The natural progression was to have him be the ultimate villain in the 9th and final film. It would have felt natural. He's too far gone, and now it's a matter of stopping him rather than trying to redeem him anymore. Instead, J.J. Abrams throws away that plot thread entirely, having him be a subordinate to the Emperor, and opts to not only have him redeemed as Ben Solo, but to also kiss Rey in what was probably the single worst moment of quote-unquote romance in the Star Wars franchise. Yes, even over Anakin and Padme. And to put the nail in the coffin, he decides to abandon Johnson's idea of not having any important lineage for Rey by making her a Palpatine. It doesn't matter if he wanted this as early as Episode 7. Because by the time he let go of the reins of the Star Wars films and handed them to Johnson, the franchise was no longer in his control. Colin Trevorrow was going to direct the 9th film, not him. So by the time he returned for Episode 9, it shouldn't have mattered what he originally wanted for her lineage because Rian Johnson set up something else and he should have just gone for that. Rey was nobody. Her parents were filthy junk traders. So let's just leave it there. Rey is the hero not because her parents were heroes, but because the Force chose her to be. That should have been enough. They didn't need to touch on her parentage at all in this film. But what did Abrams do instead? He tried to play it safe by trying to please every single fan who screamed at The Last Jedi and at Rian Johnson, when instead he should have just tried to make a conclusion to the trilogy that was satisfying in the context of the previous 2 films. These are not problems that a film critic has. These are not problems that I have as a person who analyzes film. These are problems I have as a Star Wars fan about a Star Wars movie, not problems that I have as a movie fan about a movie. This is the fundamental flaw of The Rise of Skywalker. Its failure to be a Star Wars film. I challenge you to think about this. If you don't like The Rise of Skywalker, I'm willing to bet that the reason for a majority of you is not because of the typical flaws that filmmakers make, but because of the failure of The Rise of Skywalker to live up to the Star Wars legacy. And if you legitimately dislike the film because of technical problems you have, that's completely valid as well. I'm just willing to bet a majority of people are more disappointed with this as a Star Wars movie rather than just as a movie. And on the flip side, if you enjoy this movie, as I do, I'm guessing it's not because of its place in Star Wars history, but simply because you were able to isolate it at a certain point as a standalone story and enjoy it for what it was, which was a mind-numbingly entertaining 2 hours of action and lightsabers with a hollow heart. Think back to the prequels. George Lucas's script was maligned by many, including myself, his new characters were largely inadequate, and the performances given by most of the actors were lackluster. But at its heart, the story of the prequels, not the execution, was brilliant. It told the story of political corruption as well as the corruption of one man's heart as he dealt with loss and grief in a way that was shunned by the people he chose to follow. And in the end, he makes a choice to turn to the dark side because he feels the Jedi Council to be inadequate and controlling, all while Chancellor Palpatine pulls every single string in the background. That's not only an ingenious story, but a true Star Wars story, fitting of the mantle. And in the end, in direct contrast to the prequels, it's not the critics that The Rise of Skywalker failed to live up to, but the legacy of the Star Wars franchise and its fan base. Comment down below with your thoughts on The Rise of Skywalker. I'm sure a lot of you have many opinions on this film, and I'd love to know what you think. If you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine, and I'd still love to have a discussion with you in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel. If you want to check out more of my content, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.